Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in New York. The thriller in Manila is about to get a run for its money. In one corner, that man, Mitch McConnell, who more than any other person in American politics checks every political impulse, every utterance and position he takes with the interests of corporate donors. In the other corner, corporate America and Major League Baseball growing increasingly uncomfortable with voter restriction laws that'll make it harder for some of their customers and fans to vote. But those words uttered by Mitch McConnell on January 6th, that the doubt about the election was incited, quote, without evidence, that gives every CEO in America who finds herself or himself at odds suddenly with McConnell and the GOP some comfort, some breathing room. McConnell, in that speech, giving corporations a soundbite. They can use it to protect their flanks. It's a defense they'll need after yesterday, when the top Republican in the Senate slammed corporations that are taking a stand against Georgia's new law.
I found it completely discouraging to find a bunch of corporate CEOs getting in the middle of politics. My advice to the corporate CEOs of America is to stay out of politics. Don't pick sides in these big fights.
McConnell put out a statement saying that companies, quote, will invite serious consequences, if they continue to speak out. He followed that up today by calling corporations responding to Georgia's law, quote, stupid, because, quote, Republicans drink Coca-Cola too, and we fly and we like baseball. There is such a rich irony, though, to the GOP war on corporations. Of course, no one has fought harder for corporate dollars to have more power in American politics than, wait for it, Mitch McConnell. From the Associated Press, quote, the Republican leader has been among the most outspoken champions of the role of big money in elections, promoting the free flow of undisclosed dollars to campaigns as a form of constitutionally protected free speech. This is what happens, guys, when shame dies as any sort of break on the limits of Republican hypocrisy. Now Republicans are so mad at corporations for believing Mitch McConnell in that speech I showed you, or Bill Barr, or Chris Krebs, or any of the Georgia Republicans who attested time and time again to the lack of fraud in the November election, that they're now sputtering schoolyard taunts. Analysis in the Washington Post points to the lack of facts to back up the GOP tantrum. Quote, in Georgia, there is no rational motivation for the passage of its new election law, other than demonstrating fealty to the false claims elevated by Trump. Why did Raffensperger need to be replaced on the elections board now? Why did the rules governing absentee applications need to be tightened now? Only a few months after an election in which repeated review and extensive scrutiny showed no improprieties had occurred. Once you accept the obvious answer to those questions, it's awfully difficult to assume that the changes presented in the new law were simply good faith efforts to streamline the state's election process. But the lack of good faith will not stop the GOP, trust me. Cue Marco Rubio with a letter to MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred. Quote, I write to ask you whether you intend to maintain your membership at Augusta National Golf Club. As you're well aware, the exclusive members-only club is located in the state of Georgia. I'm under no illusion you intend to resign. To do so would require a personal sacrifice, as opposed to the woke corporate virtue signaling of moving the All-Star game from Atlanta. Wow. Even for you, Rubio. The clash between Republicans and businesses who view suppressing the vote as bad for the bottom line is where we start this hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. John Heilman's here, NBC News and MSNBC national affairs analyst, host and executive producer of Showtime's The Circus, and host of the Hell and High Water podcast from The Recount is here. Also joining us, Yamiche Alcindor, PBS NewsHour, White House correspondent and MSNBC political contributor, and marketing and branding expert Donny Deutsch is here. Yamiche, I don't know whether to laugh or cry when I watch all that Mitch McConnell crybaby act. You know, mean companies are being mean to me. They're my friends, not their friends. What is wrong with them?
Well, Mitch McConnell, in some ways, is someone that has been known for saying one thing and also saying something else, in some ways contradicting himself. What is clear here is that Republicans are going after these laws and trying to invoke these laws on something that is plainly a lie, something that is false, which is that the 2020 election was somehow rigged or somehow impacted by voter fraud. We just know that that's not true. We know that's not true because of Republican secretaries of state. And now, of course, Republicans are having to come to really face to face with the idea that some of this conspiracy theory that is coursing through the Republican Party, that the voting laws are somehow against them, that is something that is now hurting their relationships with corporations. And of course, Republicans are the main ones who have had this relationship with corporations, who have talked about how important they are. And now we see Republicans really having to face up to the idea that corporations are pushing back with money, with the economics of this. Critics of this would say something really plainly, which is Republicans find it more easy to suppress the vote of Black and brown Americans than it is to earn their vote. That, of course, is critics of these laws saying that, because there was a time where the Republican Party was trying to expand its base, trying to go after Hispanics and African Americans. And then, of course, after the 2020 election and after they saw the success of President Trump, we're now seeing these laws in some 47 states to restrict voting access. And it's very clear to anyone who's watching that this is really in response to the fact that they felt like they lost the election and they want to find some way to justify how to change that to make it a little bit easier for Republicans to get elected.
John Howman, hello. Yamiche is being elegant here, and I know I don't have to worry about that with you. Critics of these laws are also critics of the lie around which they're rooted. So these laws seek to solve a problem that doesn't exist. And after the 2000 Florida recount, Jim Baker and former President Carter looked at voter fraud and found that there really isn't a lot of voter fraud in this country. I don't know all the reasons why not, but Bill Barr also was the sitting AG who was all too willing to go investigate allegations of fraud. He, too, said there wasn't any systematic or widespread voting fraud. Chris Krebs, lifelong Republican, said this was the most secure election in our country. So wherever you come down on a theoretical debate about voting laws, everyone should be a critic of any legislation based on a lie. And all 108 bills in all 47 states are based and inspired by a lie.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think, Nicole, we could rattle off the numbers of experts. I mean, my preferred expert in this realm is our friend Ben Ginsberg, who I think worked with Jim Baker on the Florida recount and came out last fall and said, I've spent 40 years looking for, in a politically motivated way, looking for voter fraud. And I got to tell you, having been a knife-wielding partisan, the leading Republican election lawyer in the country, I've looked for it for 40 years. I haven't found it. And if Ben Ginsberg can't find it, it's not there. So I think, the reality is with these laws is, we make this point, we feel like we've been making this point now pretty consistently for the last week or so, they are the notion, like the evaluation of these laws on the basis of, is there some piece of them? Is there any given piece of the Georgia law that's okay? How bad is it? Which part is really bad? Which part is only a little bit bad? Which part might not actually be bad at all? Is all sort of beside the point in the sense that they're all motivated by a claim, which is we must fix the voting laws because there's widespread lack of confidence in the system. And the only reason there's widespread or any lack of confidence in the system is that the former guy and his Republican enablers drove this big lie, and it is a big lie. It's a big lie in every way. It's a big lie in terms of 2020 that the election was stolen, and it's a big lie over 40 years that there's any pervasive or even any meaningful or even really any trivial degree of voter fraud going on in the country. And so the laws are foundationally suspect, and it's right to look at a foundationally suspect law. It's right to look at what are the obvious other motivations. The obvious other motivations are a Republican Party that is on the wrong side of demography, is the minority party overwhelmingly in the national electorate, and sees the tides of demography the way that they're shifting, and recognizes that if they don't try to tilt the field in some way to prevent people from voting for the other side, they are going to be in a permanent minority status going forward. That is at the core of what all these things is driving all these laws. And I think, we can get to the corporate discussion later, but I think that's the right way, the foundational kind of framework analysis you have to bring to bear on all these laws.
Yeah, and I mean, Donnie, look, I've spent no time that's notable or gives me any insight into corporate calculations in this space. You'll have to enlighten me, but when you've got Democrats, you've got activists, you've got the population, and you've got Mitch McConnell, Bill Barr, Chris Krebs, and every Georgia elected official sort of covering your flank on the facts. Are these really still very, very tough decisions for companies, or is it getting clearer?
It's not a tough decision if you are in a mass market, if you are talking to a mass audience, and any large company is. You know, John mentioned, let me first promote, I was listening to the podcast this morning, John Heilman's Hell or High Water. It was a fantastic guest this morning, and she was speaking very raw that I'm not used to hearing. So I want to direct everybody, Nicole Wallace on Hell and High Water. John,
this is the
podcast.
part where everybody talks about my potty mouth. Thank you.
It's good listening. It's good listening. But yes. John mentioned demography, and let me go to demographics for a second. If you look at any marketing plan of any corporation, the audience they want to reach is 18 to 34, 18 to 49. Somebody like me, who's past 54 years old, isn't even in any marketing plans other than it's for an old pharmaceutical. So the audience that they have to connect with, both in terms of their internal audience of employees and their, more importantly, their external audience, are all younger people. If you're selling beer, if you're selling Major League Baseball, if you're selling Coke, they are interested in 18 to 34. Well, where are those people? Where are their views? We know where their views are. Any young millennial, when you talk to them, what they're looking for in a corporation is social conscience. It's their number two thing after the actual benefit of the product itself. It's price of entry today. So I like to think that most CEOs, and most CEOs I've met over the years, have good hearts and want to do the right things, but they are looking for shareholder value. They are responsible to the people that buy their stock. And if they are paying attention to that, the right business decision, particularly when you come on things like racial equality, voter rights, things that are just underpinnings of our democracy. You mentioned earlier in the show, right and wrong, the right side of an argument, they're going to go there. So if you're Mitch McConnell and you're picking a fight with corporate America, it's a fight going forward that's even going to be more and more on the losing side.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.